The helicopter's rotors cut through the thick jungle air as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez checked her gear one final time. Her M40 sniper rifle lay secured beside her, its familiar weight a comfort she had relied on through dozens of missions. The dense canopy of the Colombian rainforest stretched endlessly below, a green maze that had swallowed countless soldiers before her. 2 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through her headset. Maria nodded, her dark eyes scanning the briefing notes one last time. The mission was straightforward on paper. Extract a captured DEA agent from a cartel compound deep in the jungle. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance. A quick in-and-out operation that should have them back to base before sunset. Maria had earned her place among the Navy SEALs through sheer determination and exceptional marksmanship. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she had learned early that survival meant being tougher and smarter than everyone around her. The military had given her purpose, and the SEALs had given her a family. Now, at 28, she was one of the most skilled snipers in her unit, with a reputation for impossible shots and ice-cold nerves under pressure. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, a small clearing 3 miles from the target compound. Maria's team consisted of 4 other operators, each a specialist in their field. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison led the team, a veteran with 15 years of experience who trusted Maria's abilities completely. Petty Officer Luis Vega handled demolitions, while Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sarah Chen served as their medic. Rounding out the team was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, their communications expert. As the aircraft touched down, Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before every mission. She secured her rifle across her back and followed her team into the oppressive humidity of the jungle. The helicopter lifted off immediately, disappearing into the afternoon sky and leaving them alone in the vast wilderness. The trek to the compound began through terrain that seemed designed to slow human progress. Thick vines hung like curtains between towering trees, while the ground beneath their feet alternated between muddy swamps and treacherous roots. The air was thick with moisture and alive with the constant buzz of insects. Every step required careful consideration, as the wrong move could trigger a slide down a muddy embankment or alert wildlife to their presence. Maria took point as the team's designated marksman, her trained eyes constantly scanning for threats. The intelligence reports had mentioned cartel patrols in the area, but the jungle remained eerily quiet except for the natural sounds of birds and rustling leaves. She had learned to trust her instincts during her years of service, and something about this mission felt different from the moment they had landed. After 2 hours of careful movement, the team reached their observation post overlooking the compound. Through her scope, Maria could see the cluster of buildings where the DEA agent was supposedly being held. The compound appeared lightly defended, just as the intelligence had suggested. A few guards moved lazily around the perimeter, their discipline clearly lacking compared to military standards. Morrison gathered the team for a final briefing before they moved into position. The plan called for Maria to provide overwatch from an elevated position, while the rest of the team moved in to extract the prisoner. Her job was to eliminate any threats that posed a danger to the extraction team and provide cover for their withdrawal. As darkness began to fall, Maria made her way to a rocky outcrop that offered excellent visibility over the entire compound. She settled into position behind her M40, adjusting the scope and calculating ranges to various points around the target area. The familiar ritual of preparing for a shot calmed her mind and focused her attention on the task ahead. The compound below showed signs of increased activity as night approached. More guards appeared and several vehicles arrived carrying additional personnel. Maria reported these developments to Morrison through her radio, her voice barely above a whisper. The intelligence picture was changing, but the mission parameters remained the same. At exactly 2200 hours, Morrison's team began their approach to the compound. Maria watched through her scope as they moved like shadows through the darkness, their years of training evident in every calculated step. She kept her crosshairs moving between potential threat positions, ready to engage at a moment's notice. The first sign of trouble came when one of the newly arrived vehicles disgorged a group of heavily armed men who immediately began setting up defensive positions around the compound. These were not the casual guards the intelligence reports had described. They moved with military precision and carried equipment that suggested serious combat experience. Maria's Radio crackled with Morrison's voice, urgent but controlled. "Overwatch, we've got a problem. This place is crawling with hostiles, and they're not your average cartel muscle. Looks like we walked into something bigger than advertised." Through her scope, Maria could see at least 20 armed men taking positions around the compound. More concerning was the arrival of another vehicle carrying what appeared to be a heavy machine gun. The situation was rapidly deteriorating from a simple extraction to a potential firefight against superior numbers. Morrison made the tactical decision to abort the mission and extract his team, but as they began their withdrawal, the night erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as the cartel forces opened fire on positions where they suspected intruders. Maria's team had been compromised, though she couldn't see how. From her overwatch position, Maria began engaging targets systematically. Her M40 barked repeatedly as she picked off guards who posed the greatest threat to her team's escape route. Each shot was calculated and precise, dropping targets at ranges that would have challenged even experienced snipers. The firefight intensified as more cartel reinforcements arrived from the jungle. Maria realized with growing concern that her team was not just facing a larger force than expected. They were dealing with a well-organized ambush that had been waiting for them. Someone had known they were coming, and the simple extraction mission had become a deadly trap in the heart of the Colombian jungle. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the jungle as Maria watched her team fight for their lives below. Through her scope, she could see Morrison and the others pinned down behind a fallen log, unable to advance or retreat as bullets tore through the vegetation around them. The cartel forces had them surrounded on 3 sides, with only Maria's elevated position preventing a complete encirclement. Her M40 continued to speak with deadly precision as she systematically eliminated threats. A gunman attempting to flank her team's position dropped silently as her bullet found its mark at 400 meters. Another cartel fighter manning a light machine gun crumpled over his weapon as Maria's shot punched through his chest. Each pull of the trigger was calculated, conserving ammunition while maximizing impact on the enemy's ability to coordinate their attack. The radio traffic was intense as her team called out targets and coordinated their defensive fire. Sarah Chen's voice cut through the chatter, urgent and professional despite the chaos around her. "Morrison's hit. Took one in the leg, but he's still mobile. We need extraction now." Maria's jaw tightened as she processed this information. Their team leader was wounded, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Through her scope, she could see more vehicles arriving at the compound, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they disgorged additional fighters. What had started as 20 enemies was quickly becoming 40 or more. Vega's voice came over the radio next, breathless from the firefight below. "They've got RPGs moving up on our left flank. I can see at least 2 rocket launchers heading for elevated positions." The tactical situation was becoming untenable. Maria knew that once the cartel forces got those rocket-propelled grenades into position, her team would be finished. The jungle that had provided them concealment was now working against them, offering the enemy multiple covered approaches while limiting her team's ability to maneuver. She shifted her aim toward the RPG teams, knowing that eliminating these threats was critical to her team's survival. The first rocket launcher team was moving through dense undergrowth, visible only in brief glimpses between the trees. Maria waited patiently for a clear shot, controlling her breathing and heart rate despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. When the opportunity came, she took it without hesitation. The 7.62mm bullet traveled the 600 meters to its target in less than a second, striking the lead RPG operator center mass and dropping him instantly. His partner dove for cover, but Maria had already shifted her aim, and her follow-up shot found him before he could reach safety. The second RPG team had learned from their comrade's fate and was moving more cautiously through a ravine that offered better concealment. Maria could catch only occasional glimpses of movement, not enough for a reliable shot. She needed to relocate to get a better angle, but moving would temporarily leave her team without Overwatch support. Morrison's voice came through her earpiece, strained but still commanding. "Rodriguez, we're going to have to move. They're bringing up too much firepower for us to hold this position. Can you cover our withdrawal to the east?" Maria scanned the eastern approach through her scope, identifying potential Overwatch positions along her team's intended escape route. The terrain was challenging, with several open areas that would leave them exposed during their movement. She would need to suppress multiple enemy positions simultaneously to give them a fighting chance. Copy that, boss. I'll leapfrog to maintain overwatch as you move. Watch for my muzzle flash and stay low during the transitions. The withdrawal began with Vega and Thompson providing suppressing fire, while Morrison and Chen moved first. Maria's rifle cracked repeatedly as she engaged enemy positions that threatened to flank the moving SEALs. Her shots forced the cartel fighters to keep their heads down, disrupting their aim and giving her team precious seconds to cross the exposed ground. As her teammates moved, Maria gathered her gear and prepared for her own relocation. The rocky outcrop that had served as her initial position was now known to the enemy, and several shooters were beginning to direct fire in her direction. Bullets sparked off the rocks around her as she low-crawled backward from her firing position. The movement to her secondary position required crossing a small clearing that would leave her exposed for approximately 30 seconds. It was a calculated risk, but necessary to maintain effective support for her team's withdrawal. Maria sprinted across the open ground as bullets whined overhead, diving into the undergrowth on the far side, just as a burst of automatic fire stitched the ground where she had been. From her new position, Maria could see that the cartel forces were organizing a pursuit. Several teams of fighters were moving through the jungle, attempting to intercept her team's escape route. She engaged the closest group, her shots carefully spaced to create maximum psychological impact while conserving ammunition. The pursuing fighters dove for cover, their advance temporarily halted by the threat of her precision fire. Thompson's voice crackled over the radio with devastating news. "We've got company coming up behind us. Looks like they called in reinforcements from multiple directions. There's at least another squad moving to cut off our withdrawal route." Maria's blood ran cold as she realized the full scope of their situation. The cartel hadn't just been waiting for them at the compound. They had prepared a comprehensive ambush that extended throughout the surrounding jungle. Her team was being herded into a kill zone where superior numbers would overwhelm their tactical advantages. She made a quick decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to support her team's withdrawal, she would create a diversion that would draw the enemy's attention and resources away from her teammates. It was a dangerous gamble that would leave her isolated in hostile territory, but it might be their only chance for survival. "Morrison, I'm going to create some noise and draw them off your trail. Continue east of the primary extraction point. Do not wait for me." Morrison's response was immediate and predictable. "Negative, Rodriguez. We don't leave anyone behind. That's an order from your Overwatch, sir. This is the only way. Trust me to handle my end." Before Morrison could argue further, Maria began engaging targets aggressively, firing rapidly at every enemy position she could identify. The increased volume of fire immediately drew attention to her location, and she could see several enemy teams changing direction to pursue this new threat. Her plan was working, but it had also painted a target on her back that she might not be able to escape. Maria's aggressive fire drew the enemy like moths to a flame, exactly as she had planned. Through her scope, she could see at least 3 separate groups of cartel fighters moving toward her position, while her team's pursuers hesitated and began falling back to support the hunt for the sniper who was causing such havoc. Her radio crackled, one final time with Morrison's voice, heavy with reluctance and respect. "Rodriguez, you better make it out of there. We'll monitor extraction frequencies for your signal." "Copy that." "Rodriguez out." She switched off her radio to avoid any transmissions that might compromise her position, then settled in for what would likely be the fight of her life. The ammunition count for her M40 showed 37 rounds remaining, plus her sidearm and the small amount of explosive ordnance every SEAL carried. Against 40 or more enemies, it would have to be enough. The first group of hunters approached from the south, moving in a loose formation that suggested some military training, but lacked the precision of professional soldiers. Maria waited until they entered a natural choke point between 2 large trees before engaging. Her first shot dropped the point man, causing the others to scatter for cover and giving her time to relocate before return fire could find her position. She moved through the jungle like a ghost, using every piece of cover and concealment her training had taught her. The dense vegetation that hampered movement also provided excellent hiding places for someone who understood how to use the terrain. Maria had spent years training in similar environments, and the skills that had made her an elite sniper now served her as a solo operative behind enemy lines. The second group was more cautious, having heard the fate of their comrades. They moved in bounds, with some members providing overwatch while others advanced. Maria recognized the tactics and adjusted her approach accordingly. Instead of engaging them directly, she moved parallel to their advance, looking for an opportunity to strike when they were most vulnerable. That opportunity came when the group paused to investigate a sound in the undergrowth. As they clustered together to discuss their next move, Maria's bullet punched through the chest of their apparent leader. The others dove for cover, but she had already disappeared into the green maze of the jungle, leaving them to fire at shadows. The third group proved more dangerous. These fighters moved with the confidence of experienced soldiers, and their equipment was superior to that of the other cartel forces. Maria suspected she was now facing former military personnel, possibly deserters from the Colombian army who had sold their skills to the highest bidder. They had correctly identified the general area where she was operating and were conducting a systematic search that would eventually flush her out. Maria needed to break their coordination before they could corner her in an area where her mobility would be compromised. She selected a position that offered good concealment but limited escape routes, a calculated risk that would allow her to engage multiple targets if they approached predictably. The ex-soldiers did not disappoint, moving in a standard search formation that bunched them together at regular intervals. Maria's first shot eliminated their point man, but instead of scattering like the previous groups, these fighters immediately returned disciplined fire toward her muzzle flash. She rolled away from her position as bullets shredded the vegetation where she had been lying, then sprinted through the undergrowth as the soldiers attempted to flank her position. The chase through the jungle became a deadly game of cat and mouse. Maria used her knowledge of sniper tactics in reverse, understanding how her hunters would attempt to track her, and staying one step ahead of their predictions. She left false trails, doubled back on her route, and used the terrain to break line of sight whenever possible. As dawn began to break through the jungle canopy, Maria realized that her situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Her ammunition was running low. She had been moving constantly for hours without rest, and the enemy was showing no signs of giving up their pursuit. More concerning was the sound of helicopters in the distance, suggesting that the cartel was bringing in additional resources to find her. She found temporary refuge in a small cave hidden behind a waterfall, using the sound of falling water to mask any noise she might make. Her ammunition count now showed 18 rounds for the M40, and she had used most of her other equipment during the night's fighting. The radio remained silent to preserve her operational security, leaving her completely isolated in hostile territory. From her concealment, Maria could hear voices approaching as search teams combed the area around the waterfall. They were being methodical now, checking every possible hiding place with the patience of hunters who knew their prey was wounded and running out of options. She checked her watch and calculated that her team should have reached the extraction point hours ago. If they had followed protocol, they would already be back at base, reporting her as missing in action and beginning the process of planning a recovery mission. The thought of her teammates' safety gave her strength, knowing that her sacrifice had served its purpose. The voices were getting closer now, and Maria could make out individual words in Spanish as the searchers coordinated their efforts. She estimated at least 6 men were working the area around the waterfall, moving with the systematic approach of professionals who understood that patience would eventually yield results. Maria made a tactical decision that would define the rest of her ordeal. Rather than wait to be discovered in the cave, she would take the initiative and strike first. Her remaining ammunition needed to count, and surprise would be her only advantage against superior numbers. She selected her targets carefully through a gap in the falling water, identifying the searchers who posed the greatest threat based on their equipment and positioning. The first shot would compromise her position completely, but it would also create chaos that she could exploit to even the odds. The M40 roared in the confined space of the cave, its report echoing off the rocky walls as her bullet found its target. The searcher dropped instantly, and his companions immediately began looking for the source of the shot. Maria was already moving, using the confusion to slip out of the cave and into position for her next engagement. What followed was the most intense firefight of her career, a close-quarters battle in jungle terrain where every shot had to count, and every movement could mean the difference between life and death. Maria's training took over completely, her conscious mind stepping aside to let muscle memory and instinct guide her actions through the chaos of combat. The firefight around the waterfall lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours to Maria as she moved through the jungle like a predator, using every advantage her training had given her. When the shooting stopped, 5 more cartel fighters lay dead, but Maria's ammunition situation had become critical. Her M40 was down to 8 rounds, and she could hear more search teams approaching from multiple directions. The sound of helicopters was getting louder, and through brief glimpses of the sky, Maria could see aircraft circling the area. The cartel was pulling out all stops to find her, bringing in resources that suggested this operation was far more important to them than a simple DEA agent rescue should have warranted. Something else was at play here, and she had stumbled into the middle of it. Maria moved deeper into the jungle, putting distance between herself and the scene of the firefight, while she still had the opportunity. Her body was beginning to feel the effects of constant movement and stress, but her mind remained sharp and focused on survival. She needed to find a place where she could rest and plan her next move, while avoiding the increasing number of hunters. The terrain began to change as she moved further from the compound, becoming more mountainous with steep ravines and rocky outcroppings that offered both opportunities and dangers. The vegetation was still thick enough to provide concealment, but the uneven ground made movement more challenging and potentially noisy. As she climbed a particularly steep slope, Maria heard voices below her speaking in rapid Spanish. The searchers had found her trail and were following it with the help of someone who clearly understood tracking. She paused to listen, trying to determine how many men were pursuing her and how close they were to her current position. The conversation below revealed that they had brought in a professional tracker, possibly someone with indigenous knowledge of the jungle, who could read signs that would be invisible to most people. This changed the tactical situation significantly, as her ability to lose pursuit through movement alone was now compromised. Maria needed to think like a hunted animal, using techniques that would confuse even an experienced tracker. She began moving across rocky surfaces where possible, avoiding soft ground that would hold footprints. When she had to cross muddy areas, she walked backward or used fallen logs to mask her passage. The psychological pressure of being hunted was beginning to weigh on her, but Maria drew strength from her memories of SEAL training. The instructors had put her through scenarios designed to test her mental toughness under extreme stress, and those lessons now served her in this real-world application of survival skills. She found temporary concealment in a dense thicket of thorny vines that provided excellent camouflage but made movement extremely difficult. From this position, she could observe her back trail and potentially ambush any pursuers who came too close. The 8 remaining rounds in her rifle would have to be used with absolute precision. The tracker appeared first, a lean man in his 50s who moved through the jungle with the confidence of someone completely at home in this environment. He paused frequently to examine the ground, reading the story of her passage in signs that Maria couldn't even see. Behind him came 4 heavily armed men who clearly relied on his expertise to guide them. Maria waited until the group was within 50 meters before taking her shot. The tracker dropped instantly, his expertise dying with him and leaving the remaining hunters to rely on much less sophisticated methods of pursuit. The other men immediately took cover and began firing in her direction, but Maria was already moving, using the thorny vegetation to mask her withdrawal. Without their tracker, the pursuit became less focused and more desperate. The remaining searchers spread out too widely, trying to cover more ground but reducing their mutual support in the process. Maria took advantage of their tactical mistake, picking off isolated targets when opportunities presented themselves. By midday, her ammunition was nearly exhausted, and the constant movement was taking its toll on her physical condition. She needed water and food, but more importantly, she needed a plan that would get her out of this situation alive. The extraction point where her team had escaped was too far away, and certainly under enemy observation by now. Maria decided to move toward higher ground, where she might be able to establish radio contact with friendly forces and coordinate her own extraction. The climb would be exhausting, but the elevation would give her better visibility and potentially put her above the level where most search teams would operate. The ascent through the mountainous terrain was brutal, with steep inclines and loose rock that threatened to betray her position with every step. Her water was running low and the tropical heat was sapping her strength, despite the cover provided by the jungle canopy. As she climbed, Maria began to hear a different sound in the distance, the distinctive wop-wop of military helicopters rather than the civilian aircraft the cartel had been using, Hope flared in her chest as she realized that friendly forces might be conducting search and rescue operations in the area. She pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning in her legs and lungs as she fought her way up the mountain. Every meter of elevation gained brought her closer to potential radio contact and rescue, but it also left her more exposed to observation from the air. When she finally reached a rocky outcrop that offered both concealment and a clear view of the surrounding area, Maria activated her emergency beacon for the first time since the mission had gone wrong. The device would transmit her location to any friendly forces monitoring the rescue frequencies, but it would also potentially reveal her position to enemy forces with the right equipment. The response was almost immediate. Her radio crackled to life with a transmission in English, the most beautiful sound she had heard in 18 hours of hell. Any station? Any station. This is Rescue 6-4. We have your beacon and are inbound to your location. Authenticate with today's brevity code. Maria's throat was so dry she could barely speak, but she managed to croak out the correct authentication code that identified her as a friendly operative in need of extraction. The helicopter pilot's response filled her with relief and renewed determination to survive the next few critical minutes. Roger that, verified friendly. We see multiple hostiles converging on your position. Can you move to the ridge line approximately 200 meters north of your current location? Through her scope, Maria could see what the pilot was referring to. The sound of her radio transmission and the beacon had indeed drawn attention, and several groups of cartel fighters were moving up the mountain toward her position. The ridgeline he mentioned would put her in an exposed position, but would allow the rescue helicopter to provide covering fire during the extraction. Maria looked at the ridgeline the pilot had indicated, calculating the risks of moving to such an exposed position, while enemy forces were converging on her location. The 200 meters might as well have been 2 miles given the steep terrain and the fact that she would be completely visible to anyone below during the final approach. Rescue 6-4. I count at least 15 hostiles moving up 3 separate approaches. I have minimal ammunition remaining and will need immediate covering fire once I break concealment. Copy that. We have gun runs planned on your flanks. Move when you see our first pass. Maria gathered her remaining gear and prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous 2 minutes of her life. The rescue helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, a sleek military aircraft whose door, gunners immediately began engaging targets on the mountain slopes below her position. The sound of heavy machine gunfire echoed across the mountainside as the helicopter's weapons suppressed the advancing cartel forces. Maria could see muzzle flashes winking out as the aerial fire found its targets, but she also knew that some of the enemy fighters would survive the attack and be waiting for her to break cover. She sprinted from her concealment as the helicopter made its first gun run, using the distraction to cover the first 50 meters of her approach to the ridgeline. The loose rock and steep incline made every step treacherous, but adrenaline drove her forward as bullets began snapping past her position. Halfway to the ridgeline, Maria dove behind a large boulder, as return fire from the surviving cartel fighters forced the helicopter to break off its attack run. She was now caught in the open, with enemy forces both above and below her position. Her last 3 rounds would have to count if she was going to make it to the extraction point. Through her scope, she could see a cartel fighter with an RPG moving into position to engage the rescue helicopter. The range was extreme for her rifle, nearly 800 meters across a steep angle, but the shot was critical to her rescue and the survival of the helicopter crew. Maria controlled her breathing despite the exertion of her climb, settling into the fundamentals of marksmanship that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. The wind was negligible at this elevation, but she had to account for the steep angle and the effects of adrenaline on her fine motor control. The shot was perfect, her bullet striking the RPG operator center mass just as he was preparing to fire at the helicopter. The rocket launcher tumbled down the mountainside, eliminating the primary threat to the aircraft and allowing it to resume its attack runs. With only 2 rounds remaining, Maria broke from cover and sprinted the final distance to the ridgeline. The helicopter was already approaching for pickup, its door gunners laying down suppressing fire to keep the remaining cartel forces pinned down. As she reached the extraction point, Maria could see more enemy fighters emerging from the jungle below, including several with heavy weapons that posed a serious threat to the rescue aircraft. The pilot was taking enormous risks to get her out, hovering in an exposed position while his crew provided covering fire. A rope dropped from the helicopter's cabin, and Maria grabbed it just as automatic weapons fire began tracking the aircraft. She held on desperately as the helicopter immediately began climbing away from the mountain, her feet dangling hundreds of feet above the jungle canopy. The cartel fighters continued firing at the departing aircraft, their bullets sparking off the helicopter's armored hull as the range opened beyond their effective engagement distance. Maria felt hands grabbing her gear and pulling her into the safety of the aircraft's cabin, where a flight medic immediately began checking her for injuries. As the helicopter banked away from the mountain, Maria caught a glimpse of the massive search operation that had been mounted to find her. Vehicles, aircraft, and hundreds of personnel were spread across the jungle in a coordinated effort that spoke to the importance the cartel had placed on capturing or killing her. The flight medic handed her a bottle of water and began treating the numerous cuts and scrapes she had accumulated during her ordeal in the jungle. Maria's throat was so dry she could barely speak, but she managed to ask about her team's status. "All accounted for and back at base," the medic replied with a grin. "Your team leader has been raising hell trying to get a rescue mission approved ever since they made it out. Said he'd court-martial anyone who suggested writing you off as KIA. The helicopter pilot's voice came through the intercom, professional but clearly pleased with the successful extraction. "Rescue 6-4 to base, package retrieved. One precious cargo aboard and in good condition. ETA 20 minutes. As they flew toward safety, Maria finally allowed herself to process what had happened over the past 24 hours. The mission had been a trap from the beginning, with intelligence that was either wrong or deliberately compromised. Her team had walked into an ambush that could have killed them all, and only her decision to sacrifice herself as a diversion had allowed them to escape. The implications were disturbing. Someone with access to classified mission planning had betrayed them to the cartel, turning what should have been a routine extraction into a deadly trap. The level of coordination and resources the enemy had brought to bear suggested this was about more than just one captured DEA agent. Through the helicopter's window, Maria could see the jungle stretching endlessly below, a green maze that had nearly become her grave. Somewhere in that wilderness, the cartel forces were probably still searching for her, unaware that their prey had already escaped their trap. The base appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight of concrete and steel that represented safety and civilization after her ordeal in the wilderness. Maria could see vehicles moving around the landing pad and personnel gathering to meet the incoming helicopter. As they approached for landing, the medic completed his assessment and declared her fit for duty, despite her exhaustion and minor injuries. "You're dehydrated and beaten up, but nothing that a hot meal and some rest won't cure. I've seen a lot worse come out of the jungle." The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump, and Maria stepped onto solid ground for the first time in over a day. Her legs were unsteady from exhaustion, but she remained upright through sheer determination as her teammates rushed to greet her. Morrison was there despite his leg wound, his face showing relief and pride as he grabbed her in a fierce embrace. "Rodriguez, you crazy fool. I should court-martial you for disobeying orders. But instead I'm going to recommend you for a medal." The reunion with her team was emotional but brief, as intelligence officers were already waiting to debrief her on everything that had happened during the mission. The failed operation had raised serious questions about operational security and the reliability of their intelligence sources. The debriefing room was sterile and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made Maria's exhaustion even more apparent. She sat across from 3 intelligence officers, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands as she recounted every detail of the mission from the moment they had landed in the jungle. Commander Patricia Hayes led the questioning, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had built her reputation on unraveling complex intelligence puzzles. Her questions were precise and methodical, designed to extract every piece of information that might shed light on how the mission had been compromised. "Walk me through the compound again," Hayes said, consulting her notes. "You mentioned the guards appeared more professional than your briefing suggested. Can you be more specific about their equipment and tactics?" Maria closed her eyes, visualizing the scene through her rifle scope. They had military-grade communications equipment, night vision capabilities, and their weapons were well-maintained assault rifles, not the civilian firearms we expected. Their movement patterns suggested formal military training, possibly special forces background. The second officer, a young lieutenant named Carter, leaned forward with interest. How many vehicles arrived during your overwatch period? And did you observe any insignia or markings? 4 vehicles total after we established our position. 2 appeared to be civilian SUVs, but the other 2 were definitely military surplus. I couldn't make out specific markings at that distance, but one vehicle had what looked like a radio antenna array that suggested command and control capabilities. Commander Hayes exchanged glances with her colleagues before continuing. Maria, I need you to think carefully about this next question. During your time in the jungle, did you observe anything that suggested the cartel forces were receiving outside support or guidance? Maria considered the question carefully, remembering the coordinated search efforts and the professional tracker who had nearly led them to her position. Their search patterns were too sophisticated for typical cartel muscle. Someone with serious military experience was coordinating their operations, and they had access to helicopters and other resources that suggested significant backing. The third officer, an older man who had been silent until now, finally spoke. We've been investigating irregularities in the intelligence that led to your mission. The DA agent you were supposed to extract doesn't exist. The entire operation was designed to draw a SEAL team into a trap. The revelation hit Maria like a physical blow. Her teammates had nearly died, and she had spent 18 hours fighting for her life in the jungle, all because someone had deliberately fed them false information. The implications were staggering. There was a high-level security breach that had put American Special Operations Forces at risk. Commander Hayes continued the briefing with grim efficiency. We believe the cartel was working with foreign operatives who wanted to capture or eliminate a SEAL team for intelligence purposes. Your escape disrupted their plan and likely prevented a major compromise of our operational capabilities. Maria felt anger building in her chest, a cold fury at the betrayal that had nearly cost her team their lives. Who had access to our mission planning? How many people knew about the operation before we deployed? That's what we're trying to determine, Hayes replied. The investigation is ongoing, but we believe the leak came from someone with high-level clearance who had legitimate access to the mission details. The debriefing continued for another 2 hours, with the officers extracting every detail of Maria's experience and comparing it to intelligence gathered from other sources. When they finally dismissed her, Maria felt drained both physically and emotionally by the revelation that their mission had been sabotaged from within. Outside the debriefing room, she found Morrison waiting for her, his leg in a walking cast but his expression determined. How bad is it? He asked without preamble. Bad, Maria replied, then filled him in on the key points of what she had learned. Morrison's face grew darker with each detail, his jaw clenching as he processed the implications of the betrayal. Someone sold us out to foreign operatives, he said finally. My team could have been captured or killed because some bureaucrat decided to play games with our lives. Maria nodded, sharing his anger but also feeling a growing sense of purpose. They're going to find whoever did this, but in the meantime, we need to be ready for the possibility that other operations have been compromised. Over the following weeks, the investigation into the security breach consumed the attention of multiple intelligence agencies. Maria found herself called in repeatedly to provide additional details or clarify points from her debriefing. Each session reinforced the seriousness of what had happened and the potential consequences for future operations. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered unusual financial transactions linked to a contractor with access to classified mission planning. The individual had been selling operational details to foreign intelligence services, including the cartel operation that had nearly killed Maria's team. When the arrest was made, Maria felt a sense of justice but also a lingering unease about how easily their security had been compromised. The incident had exposed vulnerabilities in their operational security that would require significant changes to prevent future betrayals. 3 months after her ordeal in the jungle, Maria stood in dress uniform as Commander Hayes pinned the silver star on her chest. The citation praised her heroic actions in drawing enemy fire away from her teammates and her successful evasion of capture despite overwhelming odds. Morrison and the rest of her team stood proudly in the audience, their presence a reminder of why her sacrifice had been worthwhile. They had all survived the betrayal and emerged stronger as both individuals and as a unit. In her acceptance speech, Maria spoke about the importance of trust and loyalty in special operations, values that had been tested but not broken by their experience in the Colombian jungle. She dedicated the medal to all the operators who put their lives on the line, based on the intelligence and support provided by others. After the ceremony, Maria returned to active duty with a renewed appreciation for the complexities and dangers of their mission. The jungle had tested her skills and determination, but it had also taught her that the greatest threats often came from unexpected directions. The cartel compound where everything had started was eventually raided by Colombian forces with American support, yielding intelligence that helped break up the foreign operation that had targeted her team. The network that had betrayed them was dismantled, but Maria knew that new threats would always emerge to challenge their security and resolve. Standing on the base's parade ground as the sun set over the distant mountains, Maria reflected on how a single mission had changed her perspective on service and sacrifice. Her M40 rifle, cleaned and maintained to perfection, stood ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The jungle had tried to claim her, but she had emerged victorious, carrying with her the knowledge that survival sometimes depended as much on trust as it did on marksmanship.